taught dance, I taught acting, I taught dialect.
My first extra job was on Police Academy.
My mum slowly learned as a few years later I started just divulging things about the first year that I spent in LA.
I cleaned the toilets at Grand Central Station.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
It's so weird that you didn't mention it.
I can't believe I didn't mention that.
Part two, second one, yeah.
So tell me about a couple of jobs you've had along the way.
When I came to LA, I was on Craigslist a lot.
Gumtree equivalent in
Yeah,
Australia.
exactly right. Yeah, Craigslist jobs, which of course everyone knows is like a no-go. I mean, well, at least I didn't know when I first, I wish that someone had been like, don't go to Craigslist to get your jobs, but that's what I did. So one of the crazier ones was getting a job as a PA for this producer. He was selling his house in escrow. I'd have to like go to his house and ring these people about stuff to do with repairs or things like that. And then I got a couple of jobs dancing.
What kind of dance?
Yeah, that's a provocative dance. No, it wasn't completely stripping, but it was definitely like on the go-go's and wearing like, it was kind of what you see in West Hollywood right now. I tell you one of the coolest jobs though. I bartended for this big record producer and we went to his house. Turns out it was the producer of Bone Thugs and Harmony, and Bone Thugs and Harmony were in the house, and I ended up becoming great friends with Crazy Bone throughout all of this, if you can believe this. And I went down with them and hung out with them at Long Beach, and I was on stage with them. And that was kind of one of the coolest, crazy jobs I ever had, to become a bartender at a record party, meet a band like Bone Thugs, which was crazy for me. I found myself getting more odd jobs with celebrities, and it's probably, or people that were, because that was just me. Like I just kind of found my niche in that land. Hollywood, naturally. What were some of the crazy jobs that you did that sort of like got started? Yeah.
Here or in New York?
Start with New York, because this is where you were, right?
Well, in New York, I just gotten out of the Marines and I was collecting unemployment. So I needed a job that paid cash in hand. And as they say in Australia, cash in hand. And one of them was I cleaned the toilets at Grand Central Station.
Wow.
I worked at, there was a place called Show World, 42nd and 8th Avenue. It's no longer there. Show World was a place where men go to partake and look at various films.
I love how eloquently you're phrasing this. Yeah. I'm here. I'm with you. I'm with you.
This place at 42nd and 8th was an adult place, and there were like 75 booths, and some of them you walk in and you could see a live show. Well, at the end of everyone's visit, someone has to clean that up.
Right, and that was you. That was you.
Me,
yeah, getting down and you're definitely cleaning the dirty.
You have these yellow gloves on from here to here. You have a bucket and a mop and disinfectant, and you go in and you swab and you clean, and that's what I did. And then I made, I don't remember, I think it was $150 for the night.
That's not bad.
Cash. And back then, that was pretty good money.
That's not bad.
I had a beefsteak Charlie, Brew Burgers, which is one of my first waitering gigs. I worked at Barnes & Noble bookstore in Manhattan. I've had tons of jobs, and that was to pay for the education.
The first job I ever had, I was 4 years old, was my first ever acting job, and it was for a TV show in Australia called Richmond Hill. The whole preface of the storyline was that I was this lost little boy that everyone was calling Alex, but in fact they find out at the end that I was a little girl called Alexandra. My mom was really happy to go along with making me look as method. She was really going method with this, so she was like, let's chop it. We'll just chop it all off. And I had this like almost like bowl haircut. It was horrendous.
Do you have footage of that you can look back and say,
I have
oh my God,
a couple of
me?
photos. I have a couple of articles that came out about me at the time, because obviously I was daughter of famous people and breaking into the industry. So it's like Jessica's moving in Paula's footsteps. My mum was a major character on it, so for a while. So
and your mom's name was Paula Duncan.
Yes.
How about that? One of the other gigs I had, which is a lot of fun at the time, but it ended up not being as much fun as you would think, coming from Harlem and the excitement of hanging out downtown as opposed to uptown. I was working at a place called Vanessa's, which is at Bleecker and 7th, bussing tables.
Nice.
And in comes Calvin Klein with a few other people, Jerry Hall included. I ended up hanging out with them. And his place is at 66 Central Park West, and it's across the street from what was then Tavern on the Green. Don't know if it's still there. And it was also the place where, if you remember the end of Ghostbusters, where the explosion was and the bull ran across the street, well, that was his penthouse.
Oh my God,
And I got to hang
iconic.
out with him, Marvin Hamlish, Liza Minnelli.
That's
But in those
cool.
days, there wasn't that much awareness talked about the party life. Everyone was doing it. And
Yeah.
he who had was the king, and etc. And I was at the end of the last year of acting training, and I knew that there was no way that I could complete the second year and make the best of that hanging out in this environment.
Yeah.
So
That
at
makes
the end
sense.
of the first year, I went to Brussels, then I went to Paris, and then when I came back, I was invited to go to California, finish the last second year. On the way back from Brussels, as I'm walking through the terminal, there's a sign that says Lawrence. And I have no idea who that's for, except, well, is it for me? Let's take a chance, because I didn't think it was going to happen. And it is me. And I get out in the car, and there's Calvin Klein in the car. The watch I had at the time was a battery-operated watch, and it was dead. And I'm trying to get it to work. So as we're driving across the bridge, he says, let's go to Tiffany's. So we go to Tiffany's, and we're sitting there in the watch department. And we sit down, we're looking at watches. The guy brings out 3 or 4 watches on the thing. He says, which one of these do you like? And I said, that's a cool one, because it was simple. Not thinking it was for me. Sure enough, it was for me, and he gave it to me.
Wow.
How about that? And that's how I got this watch. The wife gave me the band.
When you actually had to move to LA, when you moved from Harlem to LA, what was some of the jobs you started, and then what did you do when you came here?
Just about every kind of waiter job, bussing tables kind of job.
I feel like that's a staple for actors, right?
Yeah, but then I decided I wasn't going to be a waiter anymore.
Well,
and I
that's
wasn't
fair.
going to do any of that anymore. So
Yeah.
I got a job doing extra work. I working at a bookstore. It was something at the Beverly Center. I forget the name of it. But that job I loved because I did receiving. So when the books came in, I was the first person to see them. And I read so much. And I had a large collection of books. And then I did tons of extra work. My first extra job was on Police Academy,
The movie?
the movie.
Stop! I love Police
Yeah,
Academy.
Police Academy.
That is awesome.
Yeah, me and a guy named Chris Mascarella, who was a professional extra, and he's the guy that showed me how to drive a stick. He had an Alfa Romero. I became a professional driver.
That's awesome.
I drove
That's
a lot
awesome.
of celebrities, including Johnny Carson, Diana Ross, etc.
Well, I'm speaking of the extras. When I'd gotten my first O1 to move to LA, I got it as a dancer on The Son of the Mask. But they ended up asking us to do more jobs. So on that particular job, the choreographers kept finding these odd jobs on the actual set that they wanted to rope me into. So I became an extra in the party scene, and I got this big reaction shot, which was another one. Then they wanted me to do body doubling. So I was the mummy that was like, they spun around and I got dressed up as mummy. Then they wanted me to do some kind of another stunt. I was
You did
literally
stunt work.
Yeah, I did. I did a ton of stuff. I couldn't, like, every time there was these odd jobs that they wanted an extra or a dancer to do, they'd be like, oh, just get Jess to do it. So I felt like I had like 4 or 5 little mini things on that film, which was crazy.
And speaking of stunts, you remember the film Reanimator?
Yes.
I was on Reanimator. And
Wow.
at the end, when the corpses all come alive, and I was the failed operation. So I got to wreak havoc around the set and just destroy things. And that was supposed to get me my SAG card back then because of the stunt. So tons of different jobs.
That's some classic
Tons.
Hollywood right there.
Yeah, oh, lovely stories I got for you. One of the other jobs I had was at the Mondrian. And that job was guest relations. And at night, I ran the place pretty much, me and my boss, Reggie. And there, the people that you meet at
Yeah.
the Mondrian were incredible. Angelina Jolie at the time, Lindsay Lohan, Britney Spears.
Oh, I can tell you a story about Lindsay, but
And
yeah.
I can tell you, I'll tell you a story about Lindsay. So she's there for a few days, and it's getting hot and heavy, the party life there. And we talk for a couple of days. When she finally decides to leave, we're in the lobby, in the driveway. It was then that she drove off, and the paparazzi was following her, and she had the accident.
I was never in the hotels, but I did meet a lot of interesting people. So I did a horror show out in Philadelphia where I lived for a few months. It's kind of this old school motel in the middle. It was freaky. It looked like something out of a horror film. You're familiar with Halloween Horror Nights, right? So that's what I did. I was dressed up as a bride of Dracula, and I would wear the outfit from the original film, The Van Helsing, with Hugh Jackman, actually. Yeah, and I just scared the shit out of people, basically, like every night. I did that for like, like 2 months. It was like the greatest job ever.
How much training? Like a couple of
Yeah,
months?
no, a full month of training before we
full
went to
month?
and then we had like 2 months worth of like the actual job itself. It was like a Halloween thing. The extra thing didn't last too long. I definitely dabbled into, like I said, the education was a big thing for me. So I taught dance, I taught acting, I taught dialect.
What kind of dialect?
American dialect. I actually taught Australians how to speak in an American accent, and I've done that. Like literally studied phonetics and why Americans speak like Americans and Australians speak like Australians,
How
and
about
then
kidding?
and then would literally teach classes and teach like the difference in the vowel sounds and where your sound travels from, and it was a thing that I was doing for a while. Teaching was kind of that B job to support your A job. And I found that by doing that, I was able to kind of harness having a better voice as an actor and understanding how to have a better dialect as an actor. And the more I was doing it, the stronger I became. We should have plan Bs that support our plan As, but instead we kind of get taught that we have to sort of have this dream and then there's a reality and there's no sort of line in between. And I think it was the harsh kind of wake up call, I think, when you grow up like me, being on the front cover of magazines since the first day I was born, and then coming to a country where no one knows you, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have to slog it out. I actually have to work from the ground up and reboot. If I knew now and I did it all back over again, I would have done things so differently, which is why this is why I try to help so many like aspiring actors or dancers or people that are coming here. It's like, if you can learn to be your own business and you can see yourself like an entrepreneur and create your own work and use other skill sets to support yourself, you don't have to live in the fantasy and the reality. You can actually like sit in both worlds where you do what you love in different ways.
I was that kid that wasn't supposed to make it out of the streets. And I didn't want to believe that. I did the butch thing. I did the Marines, I did the martial arts, I did a lot of adventurous kinds of things. I took ballet lessons. My mom put me into ballet when I was 6 years old. All my guy friends made fun of me. But years later, after the Marines, I went back and I took it at HB Studios because it was one of those free classes and I loved it.
I would definitely say that I found my identity living in the US because my identity was so rooted in who my parents were and their fame and their success, and it was hard to know who I was within that. So by traveling all the way over the other side of the world and building a life here, and I really found out who I was and who I am. And so I think that I discovered my voice here.
So this is really home for you then?
Yeah.
Can you call it home?
It does. It is home. It is home. It's like, I think that's the hardest time now ever, being here so long and staying here through COVID. My son was born here. I was married here. The hardest thing is now when I speak to people in Australia and everyone's like, you should just go home. I'm like, this is home.
This is home.
This is home now. So.
I tried like heck to make Australia home. It was just so difficult. Everything was telling me, go home. I wouldn't listen. Again, it was only supposed to be a 2-week vacation.
Yeah.
But how was I able to make that work and still pay for things that I had to pay for here? My car got repossessed, but I was able to keep my place in the hills and survive in Australia in a place where I legally couldn't work.
I concur. It's like that same thing. There was a lot of time that I was here and I couldn't work. I've had 4 different visas and now I've got my green card and working towards my citizenship. So you go on the merry-go-round. It's how do you make it work? How do you get there?
See, and that's the beauty of this journey, to be able to talk about that, the memories of that, the sentimentality of that, It's amazing, if you realize the adventures and realize where it is that you used to be, where you came from, and where you end up.
100%.
It's incredible.